Welcome back to the Banshee Swap Kids Quad build series. In the last two episodes, we managed to beat the balls off the free Kids Quad and had a failed attempt at blowing it up for some good content. We then prepared the chassis for insertion of an old school Yamaha R5 engine, which is basically the predecessor to the Yamaha RD350, which eventually became the Banshee years later through production and development. After fabricating some really cool expansion chambers and getting some other minor things situated and getting our rear sprocket on, that completely brings us up to speed.
Welcome back, Stupid Fast Nation. How are you guys doing today? We're getting back to work on the Banshee Swap Kids Quad. We've got quite a bit of work to do before we can get a first start and a first ride on in this thing. The first thing we need to do is get the engine out of the quad, get the clutch cover off, check over the clutch basket, the clutch plates, make sure all that stuff is intact. And there, since I noticed a few of the bolts are actually loose on that side, then we're going to actually cut the top piece of the frame out because I cannot access the spark plugs from the top. I can't tighten them or loosen them with a spark plug wrench, so that is in dire need. I have to get that done. As most of my two-stroke lovers know on this channel, that you have to change spark plugs out. Not quite a bit, but on a regular basis at least. You know, you'd be out on the trail or something like that, get a foul plug, you got to change it out. So that's definitely something we're going to have to do. We're going to have to move that mount back. That's right underneath the steering here. I'm going to add some gussets to the frame and a couple pieces of tube to help strengthen the rigidity of this frame up. So it helps stiffen it up. That way when we're out, you know, twisting it and torquing it in the yard and stuff like that, it doesn't do anything crazy to the frame, and it doesn't actually like rip the mounts off or anything like that and, you know, hurt me. Then we have to put the engine back in the frame, make sure everything's buttoned up, ready to go. I might play with the exhaust mounting a little bit later on down the road, also stretch the swing arm out. Not going to do that in this video. I may also play around, take the carbs off, clean those out, rejet them for what I think they should be at for an open flow system like this with pod filters and an open DG exhaust. I also did have some time to play with the HPI CDI unit, and I'll go over that once we start working on it. Not extremely happy and thrilled with it, but it works. Also, we have to install the chain, mount the fuel tank, and run the fuel lines. I did get a three-way petcock valve for that, so we'll get all that stuff installed, get some fresh mix in her, give her a first start, first ride, guys. Let's get after it.
Start it up.
Alright, so there's actually a few things we have to do to this engine in order to get it ready to run. The first thing we're going to get started with is plugging the oil injection ports. These did have oil injected setups. We will have to take this cover off and see if there's a way to remove or block off that assembly. These bolt holes are pretty easy. Consequently enough, they are a M6 by 10 thread. So I just grabbed 2 bolts. I'll put a little dab of Loctite or silicone on it, and then I'll drive those bolts in. And then we have to take this cover off, check everything out. Compression seems good, so I'm going to leave the top end alone for now, because typically in a 2-stroke, that's a good thing. And then also I did look at the left side crankcase seal, and that does look good as well. So with that being said, let's get to work.
Okay guys, so we're actually going to skip the carb rebuilding scene because long story short, these Chinese carburetors are actually friggin' junk. I was missing a bunch of parts for them, and I wound up just stealing the carburetors from a Banshee my OG subscribers would remember. If you guessed my 472 Super Cub, you were right. She has been down and out since I stole the 472 motor to build my 521 Super Cub drag Banshee that you guys all know and love, and I took the 392 setup out of that drag Banshee, set it to the side for the OG Banshee, which had a nice set of 28mm key and BWKs on her. So I just took those for this for now to get it running, and I'll grab a set later on off of eBay. They are jetted at a 35 pilot and a 150 main.
Looking back
This is the fuel system stuff I decided to go with to provide proper fuel flow. I am using a 3/8 inch hose barb Y double ball valve for maximum flow, and we are using 2 brass reducers to drop down to a 1/4 inch fuel line size to match the carburetors, so these should have more than enough flow, even if we decide to upgrade this engine later on for something a bit more, say, punchy. Last things last, let's cover the HPI CDI. Very easy installation as far as the mechanical install goes. Just remove the old stuff and on goes the new stuff. However, the actual physical timing of the flywheel itself can be a bit of a pain to set up because you have to have a special tool to measure the depth of your piston, which should be about 2 millimeters from top dead center. I did mine with a makeshift kit from a Harbor Freight dial caliper with a magnetic base, and I thought I got it close. Then there was the ground issues, which were very hard to find. These electronics are from Germany, which I have a lot of technical, electrical, and mechanical experience since I used to be an industrial engineering technician, so I was able to easily find the resistance changing. Also, having a close YouTuber friend of mine, Vasily Builds, who had worked with one of these setups on his own RD350, was able to give some pointers also with mounting the coil to the bracket, then to the frame, even if for testing only, which thanks bro, that actually helped out a ton. This made a big difference in the spark overall. I wound up chasing my tail for about a week and a half. I also did reach out to Treatland where I purchased the kit, and they quickly pushed me off to HPI. I emailed HPI and they wanted me to do some more troubleshooting to figure out why it wouldn't fire up. I wound up saying screw it, I'm done chasing my tail, and then like most cases just figuring it out on my own. I also did try to put a traditional timing light onto it to figure out where it was firing from initially, which everybody from the forum said to do. None of this helped, but we eventually figured it out. Guess I'm gonna have to pull the plugs, verify timing with a timing light, just like the guys in the forum say. Okay, verified timing, take 3. Oh, that sounded like ignition. Rip my flop right apart. Feet of steel, man. Feet of steel. Let's go. My butt ain't gonna be steel when my wife whoops my ass, so I'll tell you that.
2 seconds later.
Please. I don't have a kill switch hooked up yet, so I can't shut this thing off yet. Oh my god. Let me grab my microphone real fast.
Woo! What do you guys think of that? That was pretty sick. My ears don't think it's pretty sick, but yeah, that's pretty intense. Oh my God, I gotta take a breath for a second. Smell the two-stroke goodness. I'm super stoked. I've been busting my balls for like 2 weeks on this CDI. I'll run you guys through what I did really fast. 2 huge things with the HPI CDI. Number 1 is the ground situation. You need a ton of good grounds. I actually used a car ground, which is like a 2 gauge or a 0 gauge cable. I'm pretty sure it's 2 gauge. We used a 2 gauge cable. I ran that from the back of the engine case up to the frame, just temporarily set it in place so that we could get a good ground. And then I also ran, which I think is an 8 gauge wire, from the cylinder head on the side of the port where the oil port was, which is the only spot I could find without drilling and tapping something to one of the fins. And then that is a direct ground from chassis to cylinder head, which I think is important so that the spark, because there's no way that this head grounds to the chassis. So it's very important to ground that so that way the circuit is complete back to the CDI. And then also on the back of the CDI. Now, guys, I'm an electrician, technician, mechanic for many, many years. So I've had a ton of experience, not only with the motorized industry, but also in the technician field for industrial applications, programmable logic control, variable frequency drives, things of that nature. I have a ton of background with that kind of stuff. So electrical is not a big deal for me. I know a bunch about it already, Ohm's law, all that stuff, voltage, current. You know, I could get really in depth with some of that. Anyways, I'm so excited. I'm just gonna ramble for a second. So the CDI on the back of the plate, it's all painted. So I ground off a few spots on the back of the CDI plate and cleaned up the side of the engine so that the back plate, because there's a ground wire that goes from the actual stator over to the plate. So I'm like, well, why are they grounding it to the plate if the plate's not grounded to the engine itself? So I ground off 2 spots there so there's good contact there. The last thing I did to get this to fire up, and I don't know how I screwed this up, but it was my own mistake, I think. The top dead center was not set correctly. And so I went back, I literally did it by eye this time. I went back, did it by HPI's manual, and I wasn't quite happy with that. So I did go back and retime that. I shined a flashlight down on the top of the cylinder head, and then I got the piston by eye, basically the top dead center, which I can do pretty good. They tell you to set it 2 millimeters before, so I'll probably tune in my advance by plug chopping it rather than doing it with like a timing light. Actually, I might put a timing light on it. I do have a timing light. So if I do that, I'll show some clips of that. We want to get this around 4 degrees advance from what the standard Banshee ignition is, which is where I run pretty much all my Banshee engines, and this thing ought to run great. These carburetors are actually off my 392 setup, which in some upcoming future videos will restore my old school 472 Banshee back to a 392 drag setup for hill climbs and stuff like that. And then I robbed the carbs off that just to get this running, because the Chinese carburetors I have are junk, so I'm going to order a set of carbs for this. But at least we can run it for now. We got to put the clutch cover back on, and the shifter seemed to fit just fine the way it is. So let me toss that stuff on, get you guys an awesome cinematic, and we'll go out and take this thing for a ripper.